Do come and sit down. Candy said it was healthy and then it failed. Oh my word, mood lighting. Hope you're enjoying this.
Empty seats. We're in the front row here. We'll have to be on best behaviour.
It's just behind us, that's all. No, I've tried to chat, but... Welcome, welcome. It's really good to have everybody here. Forgive the... Do I need a microphone or can you all hear? All good. Excellent, other than David in the back row. You're all right. Excellent, good. And welcome to those on the live stream. I do have my computer here, so the chat function should be working. I have put something in it, so if you can or can't hear, do you mind responding, and then I'll know one way or the other. Otherwise, I'm very sorry. It's really lovely to have so many of you here this evening. Forgive me if I keep controlling the little camera from here, but that's how it works. Thank you for coming to join Marion and myself. Now, much of what I will say will be familiar to you, and you'll recognise it as I say it, because it's been laced through endless sermons and different events that we've held. Just before my interview for this role, Marion and I had a retreat. It was a retreat with a difference. It was by Zoom, and we had it at home. But it was an interesting and eventful day where I believe I had two pictures for a church. At that time, we didn't know it might be this church, but we had two pictures for a church. The first was looking across a valley to a forest where there had been a lot of clearance made, and all the dead wood and bracken on the floor had been cleared away, and there was new growth coming. And I do believe after the pandemic, so much has been cleared away that there is now a chance for new growth. But that new growth will look different from what it was before. And that's what we are trying to discern. The second picture, which is something I've shared previously, is of a church with walls around it. I said it had a wall. It's actually, of course, got two walls. And the vicarage was behind a vegetable wall as well, or a wall of vegetation, which Martin has brilliantly cleared for us, so we can now see the vicarage. And the two words, the walls, of course, needed to be porous. The two words that kept coming back to us were community and hospitality. And that's why I started, as soon as I joined, with that series on community. But we've been thinking and reflecting together on those two words. So while you might have heard a bit about community, you will have heard less about hospitality. So I'm actually going to hand to Marion first to talk us through an understanding of what hospitality really is.
Thank you. So first of all, what we're going to do is, I'm going to move this because I can't see it from that far, I'm afraid. First of all, we're just going to think a little bit about hospitality and what it is, and we're going to think about the background and some of the theology that underpins hospitality. Can everybody hear me? Why do we need to practice hospitality, and what do we understand by being hospitality? The dictionary definition is that hospitality is kindness in welcoming strangers or guests. But actually, in modern society, we've come to think of hospitality as akin to entertaining, really. It's much less to do with welcoming strangers and much more to do with spending time with friends and enjoyment. All good things, but we've lost some of the original focus. You only have to think of that whole industry that we now have called the hospitality sector, which is really about making people feel good and enjoying themselves. There's millions and millions of pounds on hospitality at home and outside. And the Christian faith itself, of course, is predicated on the idea of transforming hospitality, which God offers to us through Jesus, and in welcoming strangers back into relationship with him, strangers who have become estranged because of the things that we do that separate us from God. And throughout the Bible, we're offered a very clear model of host and guest, and we see how the giving of hospitality brings blessing not only to the recipient, to the guest, but also to the host. We see God as the hospitable deity. He provided manna for the Israelites as they wandered in the desert, and they were, of course, a people who were strangers and without base, and so there's that model right from the beginning. We see a lot of hospitality to strangers. Abraham entertained 3 visitors and later realised that they were angels, and then we have Elijah, who received from the widow with very little. She used her cruse of oil and her epoch of flour to ensure that all were fed. And Elisha too regularly went to visit the widow who'd set aside a small room. So there's a really very good picture of hospitality in the Old Testament. And then into the New Testament, we have Jesus modelling both guest and host, and sometimes being both in the same situation. And when I started to think about that made me really very excited, because we've got Jesus at the wedding where he's a guest, but then he assumes the role of host in order to provide everybody with what they need. And the host has to come and ask for Jesus to become not guest but host in order to provide everybody with their needs. And then when he goes to see Mary and Martha, he values both equally. He's a guest in their house, but he values the host skills of Martha, but also applauds and approves the guest approach of Mary. And so we have both again being modelled. Zacchaeus, initially guest, host, and then Jesus becomes host. And on the Emmaus Road, perhaps one of the most beautiful pictures of Christ, the guest, becoming the host as he breaks bread with them. So some lovely, lovely pictures. And Jesus also teaches us that when we offer hospitality to the least of people, he says, you're doing it to me. And so in acts of kindness, we not only see Christ in others, but we become Christ to others. So there's a hugely rich tradition to draw on. In Romans, we're told to practice hospitality. Practice it. Not you're going to be able to do this perfectly. Practice it, use it, do it, develop it, keep on doing it. In Hebrews, we're told to show hospitality to strangers. And so it went on and on, actually, through the centuries after that. We've got the monastic rule, the rule of Benedict, where guests were invited in. There was a guest master who made sure they were looked after and incorporated into the strange and separate life of the monastery. And churches started to take over responsibility. And then the reformers, people like Calvin and Wesley, in seeing Christ in others and in seeing the transforming power of Christ already at work in others, engage in hospitable acts towards them. However, and I'm going to stop in a minute and David's going to carry on, over time, responsibility for that type of hospitality has been removed from institutions. And now we live in a world where we have professionalism that offers hospitality, either in hospitals or in care homes, or and the caring for the marginalised and the stranger has become something that is done by certain people for certain people. We've lost that expectation that all of us perhaps should be engaging. So I'm going to hand back to David.
Thank you. And thank you to Colin Matthews, who I was texting, and the live stream is going out fine, so that's good news. Just therefore to say that those on the live stream, I do have the chat open so that you can ask questions as we go through, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for that. So if that's what hospitality is, it's not just serving a cup of coffee, it's being with other people in all its guises. Let's put that in the context of our parish, because it all takes place within a community, and that is our parish. And we've got two lovely villages, almost joining. We've got some excellent church buildings with a real tangible spiritual base built up over many, many years. And various studies have shown that residents buy into a lifestyle. Speaking as an estate agent, that's what we were about. That's why you have fewer pictures of the front of the house nowadays and more pictures of a lovely view and a tiny little part of the garden. It's about lifestyle. That's what you want. That's what you're aiming for and yearning for. They want something representing community, perhaps what they remember from their own childhood. Maybe it's a small community, perhaps it's the peace and the quiet off the beaten track, and definitely over the year of COVID, something with a garden. So the villages have become more and more popular. But of course, we're active individuals. So those same studies would show that during the week, we are all very mobile. We live near a large town. We live within proximity of London, a big workplace. And so it means that at the facilities that we use during the week, we're very happy to be mobile and we commute to them. And that same scenario continues over the weekend. And we are happy to commute to our facilities. Now for us here and in Blackheath, that's probably Guildford, to a lesser extent maybe Cranley or Dorking. Many, therefore, coming to our villages have bought into a village life, but it's interesting to note how few of them buy into the village facilities, and actually they go elsewhere, which does impact on the age profile of the places where we're living. They want to connect locally, and this is particularly for young children and families, those with toddlers, for instance. They are much more inclined to be local during the week. If they're a one-car family, the car's probably gone to work, so they have to be local. But they want the connections of other people who are also local. Now that may change with flexible working, who knows? But at the moment, that is certainly what all the studies are showing. And it's difficult to break that pattern, partly because they can achieve, over lockdown, I was going to say, the family unit has increasingly been based at home because they have experienced the joy of having their children with them, but they can enjoy a service at the same time. So actually, live stream is a fantastic facility, and the better we make it, the more difficult it is for those people to come back to church, which is a real conundrum that all churches are balancing. And those young families are particularly in that sense. And those that have come back to church have all said, we would like our children to remain with us, because that is what they have bought into in their part of life and their lifestyle. The most mobile, on the other hand, are probably the families with teenagers, because every individual within the family can quite legitimately choose to do whatever they want to do. And they're all grown up enough to go and do it for themselves. So they're more difficult to lock down and hold in one place. Older children, as I say, can be mobile for themselves and they're better resourced. Those families are better resourced, no longer one car, probably two cars, so they can do different things at the same time. The services that those children are looking for have probably developed beyond what the average village church can offer them. The lights of conference-style services are perhaps more appealing. And so, again, we have that tension between really wanting that family unit within a village church because they are better resourced, they're better able to get involved, but at the same time, for the good of the family and to keep that family together, they possibly need to look elsewhere to develop the spirituality of each of those members. And that is something that I think we've just got to understand and accept and bless them. That's not mean that we can't do anything about it, but at this stage, I think we have to accept it. Older members, of course, like to return to a local community for friendship, local activities, to cut out the travelling, which by then has frankly become more of a faff and an aggravation than anything else. And while I believe that this is the age dynamic that we have at the moment, it may not always continue, because there is a deepening spirituality right the way across the age spectrum. We can enhance our links into the community where the need is greatest. While we might not be able to replicate those huge conference-style services, we can replicate what those children and families are being offered by way of community, of hospitality, and a grounding in spirituality, because we have different buildings which we can do different things with, and hence why we're starting to develop our use on the buildings to maintain that family unit. Mental well-being is a buzzword, isn't it? And it's strong during the week with our firms and companies, and it needs to be strong in our churches as well. And we can maintain that unity together. Now, our churches have a distinct identity. If we want to caricature, not that caricatures are ever ideal, obviously we have St Martin's, which tends to be more traditional and more formal, and we have St John's, where we're sitting, which is more informal and possibly more accessible for younger children. However, we have more formal services in particular appeal to those who are coming back to church after a period away, because it's what they're used to. It appeals to a large sector. As we've already said, the older people don't travel so far, So it appeals to a very large sector of our community, and particularly at the special festivals, where the degree of hospitality and returning to community and that spiritual essence is becoming even stronger year by year and has increased over COVID. And again, that's what the studies show. So in summary, I think we can have a strong appeal across the parish to the young and the young families and the older. And in between, we can nurture those young people. Even if with our new children worker, they go off to a conference-style service once a month. Absolutely fantastic, because in the middle of the week, they don't travel and can't travel so far. So that's when we nurture them. That's when we get alongside them and we love them and we develop their spiritual knowledge and essence of God. So what we need to do is reach out into our community, which is hurting from being separated for too long, for not having anywhere to go, and with the limitations on whom they can associate with. So if that's hospitality theologically, that's community practically, what does hospitality look like on the ground? Marion.
So if we go back again to the idea of the stranger or the guest and think about this now specifically within our own context, it's quite exciting, really.
Sound more excited then.
I've spent quite a lot of time recently and will be spending quite a lot of time in the next 6 months thinking about hospitality, and actually specifically about the hospitality of special offices. But Christine Pohl, who wrote a seminal book on Christian hospitality, says, "In hospitality, the stranger is welcomed into a safe, personal and comfortable place, a place of respect and acceptance and friendship. Even if only briefly, the stranger is included in a life-giving and life-sustaining network of relations. Such welcome involves attentive listening and mutual sharing of lives and life stories. It requires an openness of heart, a willingness to make one's life visible to others, and a generosity of time and resources. Hospitality is a life-giving practice." And here we are coming back to that idea of telling our story, including other people in our story, reaching out to people. And if we have a little think about, well, what does society look like at the moment, post-pandemic? It's broken. It's full of lonely people. It's full of people who maybe they need mental health intervention, but maybe actually what they really need is friendship. Maybe they need to find meaning in their life. Maybe there's a spiritual awakening. And maybe, just maybe, you already know all these people. But the thought of coming into a church is quite overwhelming. And if I'm perfectly honest, one of the best experiences we had in COVID was when we had to finish here and have 5 months before David could return. We committed to visiting a different church every Sunday at the time of the Sunday service, because then that meant we had to be up, and most of it, I think probably 3/4 of it, we had to do online. But we wanted to join with communities wherever they were. And there we were at home in our own environment where we feel safe and secure. And sometimes did we feel like guests. And sometimes did we feel like strangers. And the churches that we thought we would feel most like guests, we often felt most like strangers. And it was so interesting. Language, actions.
Sorry, Marion, were you doing this in person, in the flesh, or on?
No, most
online?
of the time we were online. Only at the very end, I think about Easter, we were able to start going. It was absolutely illuminating, wasn't it? You know, and we're people who've gone to church for many, many years and have been to lots of different churches, but we felt so out of our comfort zone. Henry Newell says, "Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them space where change can take place, a friendly emptiness where strangers can enter and discover themselves as created free. And that is exactly what we experienced in funny little churches all over the country. Churches where their technology made us weep because it was so off-putting, and yet the quality of invitation was overwhelming. You see, hospitality is about making people feel safe, secure, and able to explore, and it's about offering a place where people can flourish. And the problem is we're not always aware enough of what makes people feel unsafe, insecure, and limited, because we come here every week and it's become terribly familiar to us. I've been going to Blackheath a little bit more recently, and it's starting to become familiar. It's not very familiar to me, but already I'm starting to think, oh yes, that's how things happen. And I'm losing the perspective of seeing, what does it feel like when you come for the first time and you don't have any way of identifying with what's going on. In the past, hospitality was often offered within a context. So we talked about biblical hospitality, but strangers were rarely total strangers. They'd often be, people would know where they came from. They'd come from another, in Israel, in terms of the Israelites, they'd come from another tribe or a known nation. They might carry letters. Walter Brueggemann, who's a theologian, talks about the difference between strangers without place, people like refugees, and relative strangers. And relative strangers he describes as the people who are rootless and disconnected. And while here in Wonersh and Blackheath we might not come across many total strangers, we come across an awful lot of relative strangers, people who are rootless and disconnected. And I think we all know people like that, because that is what our modern society looks like. So how do we start to offer transformation to people who feel disconnected and rootless and might never think about walking through an unknown church, which is unfamiliar, and they probably don't even know the hymns because nobody sings hymns at school very much anymore, certainly not in certain types of schools. And we have to remember that we also live in the southeast, in a relatively educated, comfortable part of the southeast. Our experience is not the same as the experience of people 30 miles down the road in London. I went to a big school in London, and when I came here X number of years ago, my culture shock was massive to discover what it's like to live in Surrey. So when we see need and we know that Jesus can provide an answer, how do we do that in a respectful and appropriate way? And in the past, you see, strangers were met at the city gate. Strangers didn't really just knock on your door and say, can I come in? There'd be an open public space for them to come in, a threshold space, a bridge. And that's where we come to the vicarage. The vicarage, as was, is now our threshold space, because it is a place of connection for people who might otherwise never encounter groups of Christians living and loving Jesus together. And because modern life means that we can't live in a community, we're not going to live in a monastic community. And even to have one person living in the vicarage, like a vicar and his wife, or vicar and her husband, it's unlikely that that house can be open enough to provide threshold. And that was suddenly the vision that we had during that day when we were on our spiritual retreat, and the spiritual director said to us, where did you begin your call to ministry? And we said, we really believed that we would do something together that was inclusive for people. And as we thought more, David actually said to the Archdeacon, this is what our vision is, and it might not be right. And so if it's not right, then we'll take it somewhere else, because we think actually it is right, but we're not going to impose it in the wrong context. So the vicarage is not a replacement church hall. I'm sorry if you all thought it was going to be a more comfortable Lawnsmead or a church building. It's a place where we want you to come and be vulnerable and welcome your friends and contacts into a place where they can flourish. And you've probably noticed, as David just said, that we've chopped away at the foliage and cleared the paths so that the vicarage becomes more accessible and more visible. And we can't do very much about the wall around the church, but we can open up the lines of vision between the church and the vicarage, the threshold space. This is a harsh thing to say, but the vicarage isn't really intended for the church family. The vicarage is intended for the people we want to meet. We hope that if people come as our guests and we are able to be good hosts, and also their guests too, as we learn see what Christ is doing in them as they explore, that in time they too might become hosts, but they might not. They might just say, thank you, we really love the parenting course, but we're not interested in coming back to church. Or thank you, it was great to bring my mother who's suffering from dementia, and I love coming for coffee twice a month or whatever it is we might do, but I really don't want to come into the church. That's not our job. Our job is just to simply be Christ with them at the point of their need and allow him to carry out the transformation. I'm being tapped because I've got to finish. Look, I'm down there.
Good.
The vicarage has been designed to look like anybody's home, and yet not anybody's home. Because we hope that it takes on a meaning as home, spiritual home, for the people that visit. And we want to be incarnational Christ to those who come, and just importantly, we want to see Christ in the people that visit. So our vision for the vicarage is one of love in action as we learn and relearn again the depth of God's love.
It is. Now, to broaden that out, because as you know, we have various buildings, I'm going to, and I have consistently said this during sermon, so you will have heard it, but let me put it all together. Our work with toddlers is fantastic. It's bursting at the seams already. So that gives us, and fantastic work by Heather, and credit to her for putting that on. But it gives us the potential for new initiatives, such as Messy Church, such as Wild and Wonderful Church, which is where you go outside a lot. And Karen is, as the new children's worker, is going to be looking at those. I'm already spending much more time at school. I go in every other week to take assemblies. I help the children develop their own. We can work closely with the school, as we've already engaged with them over Harvest, which Kia put on. Tomorrow we've got Remembrance service with the kids here in church. About a week later we've got I Sing Pop, where they're putting on a concert here for their families, and then they're back here again for Christmas. So the more we're going to engage with the schools, the better it will be. And we will provide them with facilities, both at Lawnsmead, with here, and possibly even they want to look at their river project at the bottom of the vicarage garden. Hence the clearing at the weekend. We can develop family-friendly services here as well. Children able to use the vicarage on a Sunday, no longer a half-a-mile walk, so that actually those parents will come back, because their children, even if they're not with them physically for the whole service, will only be 50 feet away. And they can come in and out for our services as we like. Our youth work continues to be vital. As I've said, they are part of our heritage and also part of our future. And we need that close personal discipleship with them, probably through small group ministry, and occasionally on Sundays, bringing them also into our Sunday services. And what we can do with youth, we can do with home groups, because home groups should equally be part of our Sunday services. For families, we're going to reach out to them, as Marion said, through parenting, marriage preparation, marriage courses, weddings, baptisms, and we have a whole range of private baptisms, which some we've already done and others are being set up. We've got, or we will regenerate the small talk group for young families as well. We're bringing in the midweek service for them with the midweek service here for a Christmas carol. They will have their activities, but we will cross over. We will then in the afternoon also have a midweek service for the midweek service. It's going to be a mini break, but in the afternoon with afternoon tea at Christmas. We can continue that wider hospitality through the vicarage, as Marion has said. It offers masses of opportunity because of its synergy and proximity for the basic hospitality of coffee and cake. Wider opportunity for specialist meetings, perhaps those living with dementia, as I've mentioned before, and their carers. A space for the bereaved to sit in silence and also to do craft. We are already planning an Advent morning of craft for our community to come in, the afternoon for which will be specifically for those who have suffered bereavement during the year. We can have a talking cafe, occasional groups. We can be the instigator of different interest groups, film groups, book groups, and we've got a book club which is about to launch its dates. So watch out for that one. We have Liz in the vicarage pulling all the strings, and I'm worn out already, and that's fantastic. And that leads us through into wider pastoral care, Christians Against Poverty, One Cares, U3A, all sorts of things. We don't know which of those yet. We're just sort of pushing all the doorbells and seeing which doors open and who we can work with. And then overriding will be our spirituality. Over everything, in everything, through everything, our spirituality. And this is particularly the case, I believe, with Blackheath, because it is such a wonderful space. Hundreds of people walk past it every day. We just need to entice them in. Again, with hospitality, maybe with different exhibitions during the year, a space for meditation, for mindfulness, for silence, perhaps for quiet days, for retreat days, reflective spaces. St. Martin's is so in the centre of what is happening up there. We just need to provide it, as Alex and Carmina showed with the coffee morning, which was absolutely buzzing, simply because the church made it available. So we have lots of potentials for that non-threatening threshold space, so that the space that we provide for those people can become a place of meeting, a place of destiny, and that is going to include our churchyard as well. We've already started down that path of integrating it into the community, and we'll continue along that path with notice boards, more development out of the back of the church, so that it becomes a destination, a space to sit, a space to think, a space to have place with God. This church will become encompassed within that. Lawnsmead is already our bridgehead into the community. St. Martin's I've mentioned, and of course the cemetery chapel and so on. There are so many different alternatives that we can think of. So all of this is very exciting. It demands our time, obviously our resources, both in terms of logistical support and upfront help. So I've already tapped a few people on the shoulder to think about taking part more regularly in our services, because we'll have more need for those services. And with the help and discernment of the PCC and DCC, we will continue to review and look at those areas of ministry which demand our priority. So I hope that gives you plenty of focus for prayer. There are no questions yet on the live chat. There is still time. We've, as inevitably, gone 5 or 6 minutes over. I claim that we started late, so that's okay. Are there any obvious or immediate questions within the room, or indeed on the live chat? I will keep looking, that you would like to ask before we just spend until 9 o'clock praying?
Have you got a name, an idea of a name for the use you're saying about it's the threshold, but it's something, I don't know, like it's the bridge or something like that. That's it.
In case those on the live stream didn't hear that, a really interesting question of what do we call the vicarage? Certainly in my interview, I called it the Space Centre, simply because it was a centre and it had space and I didn't know what else to call it. Yeah, this is sort of launch, takeoff. I think your idea of the bridge is a better one. At the moment, we have Martin to thank for a sign that we can now read, and you can see that it says the vicarage, which is fantastic. So that's what it is for the time being, but I agree, as things develop, so we will continue, and possibly the vicarage is the wrong term if we're trying to bring the community in. There are some, what I didn't mention is that there are some outside counsellors and spiritual directors who have already seen the vicarage and want to use it, because they think this, for them, is a space where they can bring in their own spirituality to the people that they want to counsel in a non-threatening residential environment. So I agree with you, that sort of idea of the bridge or the threshold, yeah, I'm open to suggestions. Go on.
What do you think the balance will be between activities that the church runs and activities that perhaps an outsider runs, which we may help manage?
Yes.
So CAP, outside council.
Yeah.
How much is going to be us working and how much is going to be us hosting others?
Again, really good question. What is the balance between what we host as a church and what outside groups host, even if that is in the vicarage? Something like Lawns Mead, that's relatively easy because we hire that out, and what we were talking about it today actually, is how do we image that space so that they know it's a church space, so that there are things for people to take away, so that they know there is a link between that building and this building. In the vicarage, we will be in it every day, so it is definitely our space, it is our place of meeting, and we will be providing those facilities. I suppose my honest answer is I don't know yet how often or in what way CAP or Age UK or any of those other groups may want to use it. But I suspect once it gets beyond 20-25%, we will have to look again at exactly how we want to use that building and whether they are using it in the way that we want to. Because the whole purpose, as Marion said, is that this is for our community. This isn't about, and Liz has got a whole list of musical events already planned. And it's astonishing, her brain is working overtime. One of them goes by the term Prosecco and Jazz. And if I look round this room, I would think every single hand will go up as soon as I say that. But it's actually meant for our community. So if you bring someone with you, you're welcome. So we have to get that balance right, but you're absolutely right, and we need to hold that quite carefully, because it is definitely church space. It's not a space for hire. Nothing yet on the live chat. They're all asleep out there. All right, I'm about to turn you off, so this is your last opportunity. Sorry, I should be looking there, not at my computer. Anything else, quickly? No? Great. In which case, thank you very much. Thank you for the live chat, because I'm about to switch that off. I know there are some home groups that are meeting together. Others will switch off and go on to Zoom so that they can pray together. We're going to break up here. We'll turn the lights back off, the mood lighting, so that we can find different parts in the church, if we wish to pray either on our own or in small groups. Is that okay? And we'll pray through what we've been listening to. All right? Perfect. Thank you very much indeed.